This week on The Unconventional Pastor, Bob continues his series called Everybody Loves Phil. Who's Phil? Come on, people. We've been doing this for a week now. Pay attention. Phil is the guy on the left. Bob is the guy on the right. And everybody loves the guy on the left. And that's how we're doing this, okay? Very good. In just a moment on The Unconventional Pastor.
Well, good evening. Nice to see you again. My name is Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And again, I'm here with a good friend of mine, Phil Kadisi, and we're calling this series Everybody Loves Phil. Now, in a sense, I'm walking through Phil some of the stuff that I do as a life coach, someone who talks with other people, helping them find a better sense of just who it is they are so that they can come to life, to the life that they live with more of themselves, more in touch with who it is they are, in a way that they can feel really, really good about and confident and adequate to life in a way that they're comfortable with themselves. And so, all of us are always a little bit off of center from knowing ourselves, and I'm no exception. Phil's no exception. So, in doing this, Phil's agreed to let me take him through this routine, and I think that as a result of it, it's going to be that everybody loves Phil. So, Phil, welcome back.
Hi, Bob.
I'm glad you came back.
I'm glad I came back.
Good. Good. Now, last week, my goal was to really establish one particular thing, and that is to talk about the fact that there is an artificial sense that we have of ourselves, that almost all of us develop that. We somewhere along the line can easily lose ourselves so that we don't really know who we are. But we do have deep within us a sense of who it is we think we are. But I argued that that's a fictional sense of self, and there's also this self we project to the world. That's also a fictional self, and we all know that is not a real sense of who we really think we are. I also implied that if there's this huge difference between who you project yourself to be and who it is you think you are, that the degree to which that is radically different is the degree to which a person has really lost who they really are. Mm-hmm. Because if you know who you are, if you have a good and solid and healthy sense of who you are, you don't feel as much a need to project something different. And therefore, there wouldn't be that big of a difference between who you project yourself as and who it is you think you are. And although there would still really be a difference, and I would argue that should be there because some people are just not really entitled to all the information about who you are because they'll use that in a way that is inappropriate or against you, and people have to earn the right to know who you really are, mm-hmm. in a sense. Anyway, and we talked about, I remember we went through some of these things that we did talk about, that some of the signs that you've really lost who you really are is when life seems to have no passion or purpose. You have no clue how you really feel. Your feelings flip-flop back and forth quite a bit. I mentioned a few things. A lack of courage to be who you really are in any situation, or you hate your job, you hate your life, and you hate your relationships and things like that. Well, tonight I wanted to, and I put a cheat sheet over there, didn't I? And put it down right over here. And tonight I want to talk about the apparatus that we use to know who we are. Like when you're a plasterer, and to do some plastering, you work with things like trowels, and I couldn't even begin to tell you what all the tools are that you use. Right. And they each have a special purpose, and you also work with, no doubt, a wider variety of plasters, different mixes for different purposes, some mm-hmm. that are indoor or outdoor, some to be textured, some to be smooth. So the truth is, you can be a better plasterer when you know what these things are and how
right.
they work.
Right.
Well, the same thing is true about yourself. Now, you're also a guitar player, right?
Right.
Now, although you can just pick up a guitar, learn a few chords, and strum along and be a guitar player, you will really know more about a guitar and how to play it better when you know things like this. There are 6 strings. The one on the one on the bottom towards your lap is higher in pitch.
I better put another string on my guitar.
You and Keith Richards, and the string on the top is low in pitch. The frets work all the way up, and when you press on the frets, the pitch of the string gets higher. See, so the more you know about the apparatus, the easier it is to play the guitar. And the same thing is true about ourselves. The more we understand how things operate and function under the hood, the more we know what needs to be tweaking and how to tweak it. Right. If you're playing in the wrong key, you can hear that, and you know whether or not you need to come up a fret or two or whatever.
Right. Right.
And so when you know more about what's going on inside yourself. Okay, but the trouble is that a lot of us really have no clue how mechanically, as it were, internally, our brains came up with a sense of who it is we think we are. So tonight, my hope is that we, because we're still not ready to start tweaking yet, tonight we're going to kind of define some of the apparatus. What's going on, where's the gas pedal, where's the brake, and various things like that we talk about, this apparatus. The truth is, there was a day you were born and you came into the world and you didn't know anything. You're just there. You don't even necessarily know that you're there. You're just there. Visual stimulus is coming in. Audible stimulus is coming in. And it doesn't mean anything. It's just there. In fact, neurologists have discovered that when you first open your eyes, what you actually see is just a bunch of and a variety of colors. And they're just randomly all over the place. You don't even have a sense of something that you see over here versus something you see over there. And the truth is, it's as things change and the stimulus to your eyes changes, you quickly learn that when there's certain stimuluses that change, it's actually something over there that's changing versus something over there. And your brain quickly learns to place into location the stimulus that it sees. So when you first open your eyes, you have no sense of up, down, left, right. It's just stimulus coming in. Right. And part of the reason we know that is that sometimes people in a car accident might have brain damage. And the area of their brain that has maintained localization can be damaged. But they discovered that in time, other areas of the brain can relearn that. Same thing's true with brain damage if you lose some of your hearing. You might still hear frequencies, but you can lose the ability to know, was that sound coming in front of me or behind me? The brain can learn how to identify unique features of sound so that you can tell what direction it's coming from. Now, when you hear things and something's behind you, you know it's behind you. You hear it behind you. But if you stop and do the math, 2 ears don't have the ability to just do that. It's various different things through the pinny. I mean, we can talk about that fine science later. But the truth is, what happens is that when you come into this world, your brain begins to organize the stimulus that comes to you in order to turn it into something that makes sense. And among the things that you're trying to make sense of is you, right? Mm-hmm. Now, one of the first things so there's things that are going on inside of you that help to organize this information, and there's things going on outside of you that you're seeking to organize. And one of the first things that you notice as a baby is that things happen in sequence. Now, makes sense, right?
Sure.
For example, you notice, and you may not know, you certainly can't articulate it, so you don't have words, but you get hungry, you're uncomfortable. The discomfort causes you to involuntarily cry. Soon after you begin crying, mommy shows up and starts to feed you. It doesn't take long, and the baby discovers this is a sequence. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And so you see a sequence of events taking place. This teaches you that time exists, in a sense, even though you don't articulate it this way, you're too young. But it also shows you that there are a sequence of events that you can begin to predict and count on. Right? Mm-hmm. Well, and as your life goes on, you're going to start making sense of yourself based on the sequences of events you find yourself going through. And it really begins with that being one of your first ways of making sense of things. So that's one of the reasons why when we go through a particular routine and we make various observations about ourselves, others, and things that change, it's in that sequence of events that we think we can extract information that tells us who we are. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's really, in a sense, very simple developmental psychology.
Yes.
Right. Well, this also gives to us, all of us, a sense of what I call causality. And that is not only to discover that things happen in sequence, you discover that when things happen, there appears to be a cause. But as a baby, you don't know what those causes are. But quickly, 3 possible causes occur to you. The first cause that occurs to you, probably, I don't know what order they may occur in, but one of the causes that can occur to you is this. Somehow, you make things happen. For example, you might find you cry and mom shows up and feeds you. Well, you made things happen. And you might notice in several ways how you do something and as a result, something else follows.
Mm-hmm.
And you begin to discover you can be a cause. There's another cause you might become aware of. And that is, you might notice that, mom comes, she feeds you, the hunger disappears. That also teaches you that other people can cause things to happen. Mom seems to cause the feeling of hunger to go away. The other thing that happens is this. When you're hungry, you find yourself crying. But I don't know that at first you realize it's the hunger that makes you cry. You might even not know why you're crying. But also there can be other things that happen that you don't see the sequence. You don't know what the sequence is. And so causality can be for you something where things happen and you have no idea why they happened. So basically, these 3 ways of causality occur to the young child. I make things happen. Other people make things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen for reasons I have no idea. Now, unfortunately, what happens to most kids is this, and I'd say the 99.99% of kids is this. They pick a favorite. They pick a favorite sense of cause. For some kids, I make things happen. And whenever anything happens, they feel they're the ones that made it happen until they discover otherwise. So their default view is, I make things happen unless you can show me that somebody else made it happen or it really happened for reasons we don't know. But until you show me that, I believe I made things happen.
Right.
Okay? Some kids, by the way, I would say that was not you. Would you agree? Well, let's go on and see how that comes out. And if you disagree with me, you can. You're free to do that, because who knows that I don't always nail this one on the head. Then there are some people who their default is, well, other people make things happen. And they will, when things happen, they just think somebody else did this. And they won't believe that they did it or that we don't know how it happened until somebody can show that to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me talk about those 2 first. The person who believes they make things happen will tend to become a proactive person.
Okay.
And the reason they become a proactive person is because things need to happen. They can make things happen.
Power.
And they have it, right.
Power.
They come to an understanding of power. And they become very proactive, perhaps even very dominant. But people whose default sense of causality is that other people make things happen, they can take more of a victim mentality. When things need to happen, they're waiting for somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm hungry here. Come on, bring me the food, or and things like this. And what happens is sometimes in a family, you can have somebody who takes on a dominant personality, and they don't let you succeed at making things happen. They make things happen. That can cause you to feel like your role is to let other people make things happen. Now, this is one of the ways that we can, when we make that decision, however that comes about, that your default is I make things happen, or your default is other people make things happen, that really begins to shape your personality. Okay. I'm going to argue it's not the real you. It's just a choice you've made very early on, and it sticks with you so hard that it's very hard to shake it. Now, without mentioning people in your family, because I don't want to do that, I think you can agree with me that there were some people in your family who were far more proactive and dominant than you were.
Oh.
And that in some sense, this forbade you to take a dominant role. And you found it safer, in some ways, to take I will be the one to whom things happen. They will be the ones making things happen.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some degree, yeah.
Now recognize this. That is part of the fictional self that comes about. That was a choice that was made as a default. Now, I would want to argue that that's very elementary, and all children do that. All children pick a favorite. But as we get older, we will really learn to be a little bit more introspective and critical in our thinking, and really kind of do a survey. And let me explain how that process matures. But before I do, I want to talk about the person whose default is, oh, we don't know why it happened. This is a person who's going to develop a lot of very difficult personality problems. Because if your default is, oh, things happen, who the hell knows why?
Right.
Then you're not going to become a proactive person, because why do anything? You don't know why things are happening, and what you do isn't really going to make a difference. And you're also not going to really look to other people to fix things, because they don't make things happen either. Things just happen because they do.
Mm-hmm.
You live in randomness and chance. And that's a very insecure life. These are people who, if you get sick, you don't go to the doctor, because what the hell can he do? And why go to the doctor? What good is that going to do you to do that, And it's just going to happen when it happens. And if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen even if you're sick, So you can see the person whose default, and that's the rare person, but the person whose default is, well, things just happen by chance, is going to be a person in tough shape. Now, I would argue that as we grow older, a natural development would be that we begin to realize that, well, wait a minute, all three of these causes are valid causes. So I really need to think about things before I judge as to where the cause is. Now, that's a second stage of development. If that is a successful stage of development, we finally get more mature even from there, and we go to another stage of development whereby we discover everything that happens, I played a role in it. Maybe I wasn't the entire cause, but I played a role in it.
Mm-hmm.
Other people played a role in it, and there were roles being played that I don't know who or what, or if anything. I don't know if it was chance, or maybe in some ways it was me in ways I don't know. Maybe it was other people. So as we become more mature, we begin to become more multiplexed. And in a sense, this is our core sense of causality. So basically, part of the apparatus that causes Phil to know who Phil is you began life with a default sense of causality. Does that make any sense to you?
Sure.
You might not understand how that affects your sense of self, but it does affect how you're going to start interpreting things. And who you think you are is based on your interpretation that you make sense of the various sequences that come into your life.
Okay.
Make sense?
Sure.
Okay, now the problem is this. All kids start developing this apparatus when they're so young. They don't possess the critical thinking skills to develop that accurately or correctly. It just feels right. So this means that when you accepted your default sense of causality, you were way too young to really appreciate and understand what that was. You didn't, for example, know that you had other members of your family who had taken on a more dominant role, had permission. Now, what order were you in the children?
Second born.
Second born.
Okay.
And being that
Older brother.
Myself. Okay, and then two younger sisters. The birth order.
And that plays a role, doesn't it?
Sure does. The birth order and the gender in that order also plays a role, because we do treat males and females differently, and we do treat those higher in the order differently than those lower in the order. And we tend to treat, now this isn't so hard and fast that the oldest is always going to be this and the youngest is always, but this is just a general tendency. Different personality traits, different even genetic traits in each child can mess up that order of predictability.
Right.
So, but anyway, that has something to do, and notice this. Your birth order isn't you. It isn't you. You just happen to be born in that order. If you had genetically been the exact same you, but came out in a different order, this would have had a major effect on you. So I'm suggesting that all of the things that are true about you because you were the second born, it's not really true about you. It's just the experience you went through and the you thought you are based on those experiences. It's not the real you. Wouldn't it be great to break free from a few of those things?
You just assumed a role because of the pecking order.
And it kept the peace. If you want to eat at the table, if you don't want to be sent to your room, if you don't want to get spanked, if you don't want to be accused by, if you have an older brother, older brothers learn before you do how to get you in trouble before you learn how to get them in trouble usually, and so the truth is, you've got experienced siblings ahead of you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you might feel the need, particularly if the younger siblings are girls, to play a more protective role in our cultures.
Okay.
So
there was an older brother and then a sister after me.
Oh, okay.
So I was sandwiched in between a brother and a sister.
Yeah.
So there could be some significance there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we finally got a daughter.
Yeah.
We finally have a daughter.
Yes.
Let's take care of her.
Yeah. Forget about Phil.
Forget about Phil.
That's maybe.
Does that make sense?
Sure, it definitely does. I remember I have a younger sister who there were at that time 6 of us kids, and Mom and Dad sat us down, and they began their discussion to tell us that David was going to be born in a very unfortunate manner. They said Nancy's not going to be the younger one anymore, and that devastated her. She was wondering, are we going to give her away?
What?
You know, is she being shipped off? You know,
Right.
it was a little startling for her. Right now, some people kind of live that out in a way where the child might take that as an implication, and the adults have no clue that the child was inferring this from the things that were said.
Right.
So there's a lot of that going on. But anyhow, so all these things of causality are taking place and affecting the way that. I hope I didn't cancel anything there. Let me just do this. Yeah, I hit a switch there. I don't want to hit that. Anyway, so this becomes for us causality. Causality is very important to us because it's going to be one of our beginning interpreting tools. The next thing we go through is we begin to develop labels and signs. Now, this is when we begin to use words. You learn your name. You learn the names of other people around you. You learn the names of objects, you know, dog, cat, mama, dad. But what you'll begin to do then once you have those labels and those signs is you begin to acquire a history with them. You discover that the dog gets treated in a particular way. You discover that you get treated in a particular way. And you begin to associate your awareness of certain sequences with these objects, even by name. And what's happening here now is you are beginning to, as a child, learn that these objects and whatever you use inside your brain to signify them start taking on a history and a meaning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that means that later, when these objects return in your life, they're going to come with baggage. And that baggage is their history. But that's their history with you. That's not these things. I mean, for example, if your dad had a guitar and he always used the guitar to bang you on the head with, a guitar would be to you a violent weapon, right?
Yes.
But it isn't. That didn't happen.
Right.
So that's probably one of the reasons why today you are a guitar player. But the thing is this, notice this, that if your history of those objects had been a different history, those objects would have a different meaning to you.
All right.
So I'm suggesting to you that the meaning that things have that you can name
has a great impact on you.
It does have a great impact on you, but that's just based on your history with them.
Right.
That can also be a part of how you develop a fictional self.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you how, as you develop, as a way of making sense of the world, you're also building a weapon that can be used against you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The way you make sense of the world is also the way you can make mistakes in making sense of the world. So it's a hug and a punch.
Right.
It can work for you or against you,
Right.
depending on how authentic you are going to be working with it, you know? And then the other thing that I want to talk about before we get into other things here is we then develop what I call macros. That is a sequence of events that seems to have a theme that always gets repeated.
I thought that was a kind of pasta.
It can be. Yeah.
I had to
Yeah.
to lighten things up a little.
Sure. Yeah. And I need to lighten up a bit, don't I? Yeah. The macros would be, or scripts, some people call them. These are the routines where something happens that tends to have a certain flavor to it, followed by something else that has a different flavor to it, followed by something else that has a different flavor, and that particular pattern gets repeated time and time again. Maybe one of the siblings starts whining, complaining. Next thing you know, mom is responding. And then after that, somehow it's your fault. You know, this gets to the point where the next time you hear that person whining and complaining, you know that coming along in the sequence, you're going to get blamed, right? So you notice these routines. And these routines are things all families settle into. All people settle into these routines, but they're just routines. And sometimes these routines say something that you think means something about you.
And it takes root.
Right. And it's part of how you develop a sense of who you think you are.
Such as a scapegoat.
Right.
I'm the scapegoat.
Yeah, it can be.
You don't think in terms of scapegoat.
No.
I get blamed for everything. Why?
Yeah, but you experience it.
Right.
Even if you don't understand it or can't
Right.
articulate
It's
it. Yeah.
subconscious.
And that becomes a routine that you see happening right from the very point A. It might take to point F to get to you, but once you see point A followed by point B, you know, here it comes. It's on its way. Only a matter of time.
Right.
Yep. And that tells you something about who it is you think you are. And I want to suggest that had you been in a different environment where there were different routines, you would have a different sense of what those things were. And so therefore, I'm going to argue that those routines don't tell you who you are. You just think they do.
Yeah, well, you carry them on through life.
Right. Yeah. Right. It looks like we have, let's see, do we have viewer comment? Aren't we talking about the building of ego here? False at its inception, somebody asks. We are talking, in a sense, the building of the sense of self. The building of the sense of self is always a falsehood. It is always a falsehood. In fact, in part where we're going is, I'm going to tell you that the sense that you have of who you are is always, to some degree, a lie. So, and since it's always that way, the goal here can't be to find a true sense of yourself. Because the truth is, we don't know who we are. The goal here is to find a working model of yourself that is workable, flexible, and not stuck in ways that don't work for you. Although I think that there's a lot of concept of the ego that goes on here, I think that sometimes we try to distance ourselves from ego too much in a way that I don't find psychologically meaningful. We do develop a sense of ourself, which is philosophically a reduction of reality. And that reduction of reality always betrays the authenticity of that reality. However, we can't live without some form of a reduction because we can't make sense of life without reducing it into its simple forms that help us to manage it and organize it. Therefore, the organization that we have of making sense of the world, making sense of ourselves, making sense of others, is always a process of reduction. There's no way to survive without it. You can't function without that reduction, but that reduction can also get in your way. It's therefore, I would say, important to realize that there will always be a sense of self, but we always have to realize it's nothing but a working model. It isn't really who you really are. It's just it's just the tool we're using for now to put myself into context. So that's how I would understand that. And so therefore it's neither good nor bad. It's just not entirely accurate. And so I would say, that's much about in terms of ego. Anyway, I'm almost ready to start talking to you a little bit more about this. And that is, we also then begin to not only recognize these macros or these sequences of events that seem to follow a story and a script, we also begin to make insights. That is, we make various observations that become for us what I would call rigid beliefs, fixed beliefs. You might notice, and here's the thing about an insight. Once you've made an insight, your brain thinks of it in a flash. Whereas sometimes when event A happens followed by event B and you anticipate down the road is coming event D, that might happen in slow motion. You stop to think about it, oh, really? But an insight, that's something where you observe something, you think you know something about it, and you just immediately, instantly have a sense of what that is. You can be wrong. Now, insights are very helpful. They help us to think very quickly on our feet. But when insights are incorrect, they happen so fast, we don't even realize we're doing them. And it makes it very difficult to question them and say, well, is that really true? And sometimes, for example, if somebody speaks to you in a particular way and it puts you in your place immediately, that's the result of an insight of where your role is. And that can happen so quick, you don't even have time to think about the thought process that made you say, well, what makes you think that's your place?
Yeah.
So I'm arguing that these insights are necessary parts of how we cope and deal in the world, but they also can tell a false tale. So the truth is, in some ways, the deck was stacked against you from the very start.
Jeez.
Damn.
Wow.
No, but when we take it too seriously, or when we don't have enough flexibility with it, when life becomes for us too rigid, when there's too much control around us, then we're not as free to allow these things to develop and change and be flexible. But when they become rigid and stuck and stiff, a personality trait starts growing out of here that's going to be very difficult to change, and yet it's all a false sense of who you are. But so let me ask you this. You can see this organizing information. You can see how this is really part of how all human brains work, and that based on your particular history, this is how your particular labels and signs and macros and insights came about.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah.
And you mentioned a few here that you could think of.
So it's part of child development.
Definitely it is. And we go through phases. There are times in your life when certain things are important, and times when other things become important. And, you have to, even Erik Erikson has this thing, where you talk the developmental stages that we have to go through. And there's a time when you have to figure out your ego strength, your ability of power, your adequacy to things, whether or not you can trust others. And there's a whole sequence of things that you go through. And depending on how successfully, in a healthy way, you get through each stage, it either aids or complicates the next stage you go through.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What about experience? As you're growing,
Sure,
childhood to adulthood, I mean, experience has a great impact on the ego, on the personality.
It sure does,
and in development.
And there's a sense of when I'm talking about
positive experience,
Sure.
negative experience.
Okay, now when we're talking about experience, we're talking about two things here. Then we're talking about the sequence of events that you experience, and we're also talking about the interpretation of those events, what they mean to you. And so, in a sense, when you're talking about experience, you're summarizing what we had already talked about in terms of observing sequences and assigning a historic label with macros and insights placed on them. And that comes out of your experience. You can't have those until you actually go through an experience. And your experiences are going to be unique because they involve all the history of everything going on around you, including you. And if the things going on around you were totally different, if you lived, for example, as a child during the war when there's bombing going on, this is a different set of experiences for you than if you're living in a time of great abundance and great productivity and things like that.
And
so,
I think I don't know if you left this out, your environment.
Definitely. Yeah, because you experience it. It's part of what you observe. It's part of what's there.
I mean, if you were born into a middle-class family or a wealthy family or a poor family, it's going to have some kind of...
It'll radically alter your attitude and your sense. Which, then again, think about it. If you were born in a different family with a different set of circumstances, you can see how that would change the you think you are. And I'm going to argue that whatever that could have changed can't possibly be the real you. That's just your sense of self based on your experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you could find a way of rising above that experience to a way of looking towards where you are headed, where you can go, and in a way where you can kind of shake the experience of the past in a way that it has shaped you simply because it was your experience, not because it was you.
Right.
But before you can do that, you got to believe that experience isn't you, it's just what you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you can, and the sooner you can make that divorce, that just because you went through it doesn't make it you, you're going to find it a lot easier to let go of the conclusions you drew about yourself.
Because all of that is internalized.
It's terribly internalized, yeah. And so the thing is to kind of get it out in the open and allow that process to kind of break up and more mature and function in a far healthier manner. And good parents, if they know better, will try to actually help a child move in that direction if they know better. Very few parents do. The things I know as a parent now, oh my goodness, I wish I'd known it when my kids were younger. I could have been so much of a better parent, but it's too late. I'm
But
just going to have to do it as
there's-
grandfather.
But you know what? Throw a mental illness into this whole scenario.
Right. And that alters the apparatus. Now, if a mental illness is caused by trauma, this is damage done to the person through experience of trauma. If the mental illness is caused by various different physical problems, genetic problems, then the apparatus is itself already in a manner, I don't want to use the word defective, but that does seem to express not functioning properly. This can become a serious issue. I mean, you have kids who are autistic. You have, and this is going to definitely throw. And usually, if we can recognize some of these legitimate problems, we make modifications and adapt the way we deal with the child. If we're thoughtful and kind, and we will. And yes, it does. It radically alters. Now, as a theist, as a person who believes in God, I personally believe, and I can't prove this at all, but I personally believe that the person you are occupies your body and is therefore constrained by your body and constrained by your experience. But the real you is someone who, if could be freed from this body, could thrive in a manner that is away from those constraints. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense in which we have no idea who that person could be.
Well, you're talking about suppression of self.
Not just suppression of self, but
feelings, suppress.
Well, that's part of it. But what I'm talking about is also the very fact that you're human, that you live in a human body, is a constraint placed on yourself.
Right.
For example, some people have a brain that gives them an IQ of 165. Some people have a brain. Some people have a brain that gives them an IQ of 100, some 75. But is the person living within that body somebody who's not really constrained by that, and yet so long as that's their living experience, that will be their constraint. So there's a sense in which who you are during this phase of life as a human being may involve a working model, but there's a possibility there's a real you that goes beyond that transcends that. Mm-hmm. And you can't be that person until such time as after death, So there's a sense in which you can be adequate to existence in a manner you don't understand yourself to be adequate to life. That's kind of a more of a supernatural kind of spiritual insight.
Right.
Now, this brings us though to the a noticing of the events. I talked about some things going on inside you. Let's talk about some of the things that are going on outside of you. First of all, everybody in life begins to make what I call general observations. You see the dog. The dog's got fur, hair, and you begin to see other dogs and they have fur, hair. And next thing you know, you can identify a dog. And sometimes after a while, you've seen several species. Next thing you know, a little kid knows that a poodle's a dog and a greyhound's a dog. And they might wonder.
That's a bus, isn't
it? It can be. Yeah.
Little joke there. Hey,
Yeah, why not? But you make general observations. Now, the observations that you make are those things that stand out to you for whatever reason. But do you notice everything? No. So that means that your general observations that you make, you only make the observations you can, and your brain can only take in so much information at a time. So there's a sense here in which your observations are very selective.
Or generalized.
Yeah. You've even observed things about yourself. Oh, I notice I do this, I notice that. And there's things about yourself you don't notice. So there's a sense in which the general observations you make about yourself are highly selective. So that what it is you've observed about yourself is in some ways not a fair or honest view of who you are. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So we can be somebody other than what we've observed ourselves being. And we actually may already be somebody different from whom we've observed ourselves being. I'm trying to say this to kind of free you away from the things that might have latched onto you that you think you can't move above or beyond. There's other things that we notice in life, not just general observations. But we also notice things during changes. Like you see a house burning. The fire is changing the house. And you notice that the house is very different after the fire than it was before the fire. And you become aware of the fact that things change as a result of things around them changing. But you might notice that, say, a steel rod in the fire didn't change at all. And so you notice that sometimes when things change, other things don't change. You even notice that when certain events happen in your life, it changes you. Some events happen in life and you don't change. So you make certain observations in the process of these changes about yourself, about other people. But let me ask you this. You don't see all the changes that are possible to be made, and you don't even really notice everything about yourself that does change or everything about yourself that doesn't, do you?
No.
Of course.
No.
So that means that the way you have come to make sense of yourself by the way you've gone through various changes in your life are really selective observations, and they could therefore be not representative of who you really are.
Right.
And yet, all of us have a sense of who we are based on how we've dealt with changes. And the last thing that we do is all of us as people, that where we acquire a sense of who we are, is we observe relationships and other people. There are people around you talking to you, saying things, doing things, accomplishing things with you and without you. And you observe these people. And the things they do that you can't, the things they do that you can, the things they say about you, the things they tell you you can or must do, and the things they tell you you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that become to you observations, and you either validate them or you don't. And so therefore I'm saying there are people in your life who have been an influence. The things they do, the way they behave, and what you observed about it makes you think you know something about yourself, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Can you think of something in particular without we don't want to badmouth anybody or maybe you can say something positive, something you'd learned. You're a plasterer. Your dad was a plasterer. You saw that, and as you worked with him, you discovered I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the other things that anything else you can think of though
That
involves things you learned about yourself that are based upon the influence somebody else had on you, good or bad.
Teachers. I mean, there were teachers that it's interesting. Teachers see something in you that you don't see.
Oh, right.
This one teacher thought you should be an actor. I think you'd be a great actor. I want you to take drama club.
Yeah.
That had a great impact on me.
Sure.
I mean, a great impact. I mean, it changed my life.
Right. Exactly. And that's exactly.
And I never thought, me on stage? No way.
And there's a sense in which you think, now you can think of yourself as an actor. And it's part of who you see yourself as.
It's part of me.
Okay. Now, the story I've been telling here is this. I'm going to argue that there are certain general observations you've made. And then there are certain observations you've made during the processes of change. And certain observations you've made in the context of relationships with other people. And then you begin to see the apparent truth of these in sequences of events that happen. And this particularly rings true when you go through a life experience that you never forget. Memorable experiences are memorable in your life for many reasons, but one very big reason. The reason why certain memorable events stick with you forever is this. You can see the general observations as true in that event. You can see the aspects of change that you've observed in that event.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, that event becomes a mini story. That's your story. And so that's why this memorable event becomes memorable to you, one of the reasons.
Good or bad or indifferent.
Exactly. And so what I am going to argue is this. If you want to know just what general observations you've made that affect you, if you want to know just what labels you have that affect you, if you want to know what sequences affect you, if you want to know what changes have affected you, if you want to know what people have affected you, you will find that information in the memories you have from your past that stand out to you.
Oh, most definitely.
Right, and that's why they stand out to you. What that means is, therefore, we can re-examine some of the events you've gone through. reinterpret them in a different way. Come away from them with a different meaning.
Oh, absolutely.
And what will happen is you'll be left with a very different sense of who it is you are. Does that make sense?
Oh.
Right. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to learn the apparatus cognitively going on inside of us and see how that works so that we can start making it work for us instead of against us, or instead of being passive victims of these events just happen, these memories occur, and this is just who I am. Sorry. No, you can begin to say, I'm going to take a more proactive role in understanding these events and seeing what they really do say about me.
Dissect them and make them work for you.
And reinterpret them in a way that is honest.
Right.
Instead of in a way that is less mature.
Okay, I always thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should rethink.
And you
that
can.
Experience.
And you can.
Rethink it.
Yeah. Right. And you can. And you should. Because think about it this. Every memory you have from the past made sense to you based on the maturity you had at the time it happened.
Right.
And you're a more mature person now.
Right.
Your view of what happened back then, if you were to go through it again, would be very different. So why be latched on to that version of it?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
So that's where we're going to go on from here. Now, believe it or not, we've run out of time.
Oh my
But this
God.
I know it just goes so quick.
I was just getting into it.
I know. And as we get into this, I'm finishing up the sense where I'm trying to teach you what some of this apparatus. Now, come next week, we're going to start talking to you and get you talking more as you begin to think of some of these memories, as you begin to spot the changes, the general observations, the people involved, and the story you told yourself that this must tell you who you are. And we'll take a look at some of those things and re-examine them, tear them apart, rebuild them in a very different way. And you will find that if you can do that authentically and think it through enough events, suddenly a very different sense of who you are begins to just naturally grow out of it.
This guy's good.
Tries
this
to be.
guy is good.
Yeah. So basically, this is the way we're going to rediscover that everybody loves Phil. And the most important thing here that works with you is I don't want everybody to love Phil. I want Phil to love Phil. You know what I'm saying? It's great if everyone else does, but you're the one who needs to really love you. Absolutely. And you can get there. And you can be there by having a genuine, honest, empathetic, and realistic expectation of who you are, an appreciation for the conclusions you've made based on the maturity you had at the time, and in a sense you can even forgive yourself, as it were, move on, and let that person in you just emerge and grow and discover it's a wonderful, awesome person. Because it is.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
Well, anyway, that's all we have time for. I wish we had time for more. But I'm Bob Greaves, and this is Phil Gadisi. Everybody loves Phil, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Oh, we have an audience.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Good show, guys. Good show, Bob. Good show, Phil. We will see y'all later. Get ready for the Cult of Honesty. All right, take it easy.